David Thompson was the kind of man who drew admiration effortlessly. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a charisma that could charm anyone in the room, he was a prominent figure in his city's elite social circles. His wealth was well known, amassed through years of shrewd business decisions and relentless ambition. Neighbors and colleagues alike respected him, not just for his success, but for his polished manners and the warmth he displayed in public. On paper, he was the perfect husband, the epitome of a man who had it all. By his side was Emma, his wife, a woman whose gentleness and trustworthiness seemed to radiate from every gesture. She was in her second trimester of pregnancy, her serene smile and graceful demeanor earning admiration from everyone who met her. Friends often commented on how lucky David was, and the two appeared inseparable, embodying the ideal of a happy, affluent family. Their evenings were filled with laughter and carefully curated elegance, dinners with friends, and leisurely walks in the landscaped gardens surrounding their urban apartment complex. Everything suggested stability, love, and harmony. Yet beneath the glittering surface, subtle cracks had begun to show. Emma noticed the way David's phone buzzed incessantly, how he would step away to take calls in hushed tones, and the sudden late nights he claimed were work-related. Sometimes, he would vanish for hours without explanation, leaving Emma with a growing unease she tried to dismiss. Rumors had started circulating in whispers around the neighborhood, of a younger woman seen leaving David's office late at night, of flirtatious glances in public spaces, but Emma tried to believe in her husband's fidelity. Their home, a luxurious apartment with state-of-the-art security, mirrored the life they projected, sleek, polished, and seemingly invulnerable. Still, as she stood near the balcony one evening, feeling the soft breeze against her skin, Emma felt a pang of anxiety she couldn't explain. Something was wrong. A shadow of doubt crept into her mind, and for the first time, the perfect life she knew felt fragile, as if it could shatter in an instant. David's life, seemingly perfect on the surface, concealed a dangerous secret. Among the people who orbited around his polished world was Claire Reynolds, a woman whose presence could both captivate and unsettle. Younger than Emma by nearly a decade, Claire carried an aura of ambition and seduction that was impossible to ignore. Her dark, calculating eyes seemed to pierce through people's defenses, and her every gesture was carefully measured to charm, manipulate, and extract whatever she desired. She thrived on attention, and David became her latest fascination. They had met at a charity gala, an event David attended out of social obligation. Claire, posing as a volunteer coordinator, approached him with a smile that seemed innocent but carried an unmistakable allure. Their conversation had been brief at first, casual small talk about philanthropy and business. But over the next few weeks, chance meetings turned into planned encounters. Coffees under the guise of work, late-night discussions over financial matters, and private dinners at quiet restaurants where no one could recognize them. David, intoxicated by the thrill of secrecy and Claire's attention, began lying habitually, explaining away late nights as urgent client meetings, concealing his growing obsession. He showered Claire with gifts, expensive jewelry, designer dresses, and clandestine trips, while maintaining his public image as the devoted, loving husband to Emma. The contrast was stark. The warmth and tenderness he displayed at home were genuine enough to mask the deceit, but toward Claire, he revealed a reckless, impassioned side, feeding his ego and desire. Meanwhile, Emma sensed subtle changes in her husband. He seemed distracted, distant, and often lost in thought. Sometimes she caught him smiling at his phone in a way that made her stomach twist with unease. Yet she dismissed her instincts, convincing herself that her fears were unfounded. David's motivations grew clearer with each passing day, a mix of lust, thrill, and the desire for freedom from responsibility without scandal. He longed to live unencumbered, to indulge in desire without consequences, and Claire offered the perfect temptation. What began as curiosity had escalated into obsession, a dangerous fire that would soon engulf everyone in its path. Emma had always trusted David implicitly, but subtle signs began to gnaw at her confidence. It started with the small, almost unnoticeable changes. David's phone never left his side, and he became unusually protective of it, quickly silencing notifications or stepping out of the room to take calls. There were lipstick smudges she couldn't explain, scents of perfume that were unfamiliar, and the occasional mysterious receipt for dinner reservations or gifts she hadn't been included in. Each tiny clue felt like a puzzle piece she didn't want to see, yet she couldn't ignore entirely. Friends and family began to notice the strain on her. "He seems distracted," one friend whispered after a casual brunch. Another warned gently, "Maybe keep an eye on him, you know these things sometimes aren't what they seem." Emma would nod, smiling politely, but her mind wrestled with doubt. She wanted to believe in the man she married, in the life they had built together. After all, David had always been charming, attentive, and careful with her heart. The whispers of betrayal felt almost impossible to reconcile with the husband she knew. Despite growing unease, David's manipulation was subtle and effective. He would apologize for late nights, claiming work pressures, or frame her concerns as misunderstandings. Sometimes he'd pull her close, kiss her forehead tenderly, and remind her how much he loved both her and their unborn child. Those gestures made her doubt her own instincts, leaving her suspended between suspicion and hope. Even as she tried to brush off the nagging feelings, her intuition warned her that something was amiss. There was a tension in the air, a sense of hidden danger lurking just beyond the surface of their carefully curated life. Emma's unease grew steadily, a quiet undercurrent of anxiety that foreshadowed the life-altering events that were soon to come, though she could not yet imagine the full depth of the betrayal waiting in the shadows. David had planned the evening meticulously, ensuring that no one would suspect a thing. He approached Emma with his usual charm, suggesting a simple outing to pick up a few items for the apartment. "It'll be quick," he promised, flashing a reassuring smile. Emma, still trusting him despite the nagging unease in her chest, agreed, unaware that this routine errand would become a night that would alter their lives forever. The elevator in their luxurious apartment complex was sleek and modern, with mirrored walls that reflected both their images and the tension that neither wanted to acknowledge. Emma stepped in first, her hand resting lightly on her growing belly. David followed, closing the doors with an automatic click that sounded sharper than usual in the quiet of the hallway. At first, everything seemed normal. The gentle hum of the elevator, the soft lighting, the comforting sense of routine. Then, in a heartbeat, the atmosphere shifted. David's expression hardened, and the warmth he had so carefully cultivated melted away. Words that were meant to sound casual carried a dangerous edge. He began to explain his obsession with someone else, how he felt trapped, how the life they shared was no longer enough for him. The charm was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Emma's stomach dropped as the realization of his betrayal crystallized. Before she could react fully, he shoved her toward the back of the elevator. The confined space amplified the terror, and she stumbled, hitting the railing with a sickening thud. The elevator lurched as if echoing her shock, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Emma's mind raced, fear, confusion, disbelief intertwining into a blur. She realized that this was not an accident, not a moment of anger, but a deliberate act of betrayal. Outside, the building seemed oblivious. The hum of distant conversations, the faint echo of footsteps in the lobby, and the routine chime of the elevator floors passing were deafening against the horror unfolding inside. David, heart pounding not with guilt but with thrill, left her struggling in the confined space, consumed by shock and fear. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind the life they had built, the trust they had shared, and the child growing within her. Emma's survival instinct kicked in immediately. Clinging to the railing, she steadied herself, her mind a whirlwind of anger, fear, and determination. Even in that terrifying moment, she knew one thing with chilling clarity: this betrayal would not remain hidden forever. The events of that night were only the beginning, and the life she had known was gone, replaced by a harrowing fight for justice and survival. Emma awoke in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her senses. Her body ached, her mind spun, and the reality of what had happened weighed heavily on her. The elevator incident had left her shaken, both physically and emotionally, and the fragility of her life, and that of her unborn child, hit her with full force. Though she had survived, the trauma lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake, a constant reminder of her husband's betrayal and the danger she had narrowly escaped. Family and friends rallied around her. Her parents arrived immediately, offering comfort and support, while siblings hovered protectively, refusing to leave her side. They whispered reassurances, urging her to rest, to allow herself to heal, and to trust that justice would eventually be served. Even so, Emma found it difficult to speak, to articulate the depth of the shock and fear she had experienced. The betrayal by someone she had loved and trusted so deeply cut far more sharply than any physical injury. David's presence, or rather, his absence, was another torment. He called sporadically, his voice a mixture of feigned concern and subtle threats, each word a calculated attempt to maintain control over a situation he had shattered. He claimed regret, masked as worry, but Emma could see through the act. Every call reminded her of the dangerous obsession he had placed above their family, the selfishness that had put her and her unborn child at risk. As she recovered, Emma's thoughts turned inward. She felt anger, grief, and a simmering desire for justice building quietly alongside her need to protect her son. The betrayal had left scars, but it had also awakened a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She began to think strategically, quietly planning for the day when her child, once grown, would understand the depth of what had occurred and perhaps take action that she herself could not yet imagine. Even as she struggled with fear and trauma, Emma knew one truth with clarity: life could never return to the way it had been. The perfect life she had once known was shattered, replaced by vigilance, caution, and a growing determination. Each day of recovery strengthened her resolve, and a quiet, relentless hope began to take root. The hope that one day, justice, in its most fitting and shocking form, would be served. As the years passed, Emma's son, Daniel, grew up under the careful protection of his mother, unaware of the full scope of the danger that had once threatened them. From a young age, he exhibited intelligence and curiosity, absorbing every lesson his mother subtly wove into his life. Emma, careful not to frighten him with the details of his father's betrayal, instead instilled in him a sense of justice, resilience, and moral responsibility. She encouraged him to ask questions, to observe, and to stand up for what was right, qualities that would later become crucial in shaping the path of revenge she quietly hoped he would follow. Daniel's childhood was marked by a mixture of normalcy and quiet tension. Outwardly, they maintained a semblance of stability. School, friends, and weekend outings provided the framework of a happy family life. Yet, Daniel sensed the unspoken weight his mother carried. There were moments when her eyes darkened with memories, when her hands trembled slightly as she recounted tales of betrayal in stories thinly veiled with metaphor. These glimpses taught him empathy, awareness, and a growing sense of vigilance. He began noticing small inconsistencies in people's behavior, learning that appearances could be deceiving and that the truth often lurked beneath the surface. By the time Daniel reached adolescence, his mind had become sharper, more analytical. He excelled academically, showing an uncanny ability to read situations and anticipate outcomes. The anger he felt toward the father he barely knew simmered quietly, fueled by stories his mother selectively shared and by the natural sense of injustice that any child would feel. Yet, he also wrestled with conflicting emotions: longing for a father figure, curiosity about the man who had once been part of his life, and a desire to see justice done without succumbing to darkness himself. Emma watched Daniel with a mixture of pride and cautious hope. She encouraged his growth, nurturing both strength and compassion, while subtly preparing him for a future in which he might confront the man who had shattered their family. Little did Daniel know, the lessons he learned in patience, observation, and moral courage were laying the foundation for a revenge that would shock everyone and restore the balance his mother had quietly sought for so many years. Meanwhile, David continued to live a life of arrogance and self-assuredness, believing that the consequences of his actions were long behind him. He maintained his social appearances, attending charity galas, business dinners, and community events with a practiced charm that concealed the rot at the center of his personal life. The neighborhood still admired him, unaware of the dark secret that lay behind his perfectly polished smile. In his mind, he had escaped any true accountability, and the thrill of freedom from responsibility fed his ego. Claire, the mistress, grew restless. Initially drawn to David's wealth and charm, she began to sense cracks in their secret arrangement. His attention wavered, distracted by the demands of public appearances and the careful management of his image. Jealousy flared over trivial interactions, and minor conflicts escalated into tense arguments. Claire's ambitions made her both manipulative and demanding, yet David, confident in his control over the situation, brushed off the warnings, convinced that no one could touch him. Meanwhile, Daniel, now aware of his father's continued arrogance, began observing from a distance. He watched how David interacted with the world, noting patterns, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. Each social event and public appearance became a source of information, an opportunity to understand the man who had destroyed his family. Daniel's growing intelligence and awareness allowed him to see the subtle cues that others missed, micro-expressions, shifts in behavior, and inconsistencies in David's stories. Neighbors, friends, and even business associates began to notice subtle tensions, whispers of scandal that David had yet to perceive. The seeds of his eventual downfall were already taking root, unnoticed by the man who had believed himself untouchable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would combine cunning observation, patience, and the calculated brilliance of a son determined to deliver justice for the betrayal that had haunted his mother, and his life, since birth. By the time Daniel reached adulthood, the quiet anger that had simmered within him transformed into a focused determination. Under Emma's careful guidance, he had grown not only intelligent but also disciplined, with a mind capable of analyzing situations and anticipating human behavior with remarkable precision. Every lesson she had imparted, the importance of vigilance, the value of patience, and the necessity of moral clarity, had laid the groundwork for a future confrontation. Daniel's resolve was now firm. He would make his father pay for the betrayal that had scarred both his mother and his own childhood. Daniel began his preparations with careful observation. He studied David's daily routines, noting patterns, habitual locations, and interactions with both colleagues and acquaintances. He paid attention to his father's weaknesses, the arrogance that blinded him, the reliance on charm to manipulate others, and the moments when his carefully constructed facade faltered. Daniel also watched Claire, learning how she exerted influence over David and how cracks in their secretive partnership could be exploited. Every detail, no matter how small, became a piece of a complex puzzle he was assembling. His planning extended beyond mere observation. Daniel researched legal frameworks, social vulnerabilities, and the psychology of deceit. He considered how to leverage public perception, how to gather irrefutable evidence, and how to ensure that his actions would bring justice rather than chaos. While the fire of revenge burned within him, he balanced it with moral caution. He understood that the line between retribution and ruin was thin, and he meticulously avoided crossing it. The psychological tension mounted as Daniel tested small probes, subtle interventions that revealed the extent of his father's arrogance and carelessness. He found ways to gain insight into David's private life without raising suspicion, whether through discreet social engineering or careful digital research. Each success fueled his confidence, while each minor setback taught him patience and adaptability. Emma, watching from the sidelines, felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She knew the path Daniel had chosen was fraught with danger, yet she also understood that the preparation he undertook now was essential for the moment when justice would finally be served. In quiet conversations, she reinforced the values of resilience and strategic thinking, ensuring that Daniel remained not only sharp but morally grounded. As Daniel meticulously laid the groundwork, a sense of inevitability began to build. Every calculated move, every patient observation, was bringing him closer to a confrontation that would shock everyone, an encounter in which the son's intelligence, courage, and sense of justice would force the truth into the light and bring his father face to face with the consequences of a betrayal long concealed. Daniel's first moves were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet calculated with precision. He began infiltrating his father's world in small ways, attending public events where David was present and observing the behavior of those around him. Business dinners, charity functions, and community gatherings became opportunities to study his father's habits, mannerisms, and social interactions. Every smile, every handshake, every seemingly casual remark was a clue, revealing patterns that Daniel would later exploit. He also began to test his father's reactions indirectly. Minor interventions, such as discreetly questioning colleagues about David's past decisions or creating small, controlled disturbances in social situations, allowed Daniel to gauge his father's temperament, arrogance, and ability to manipulate outcomes. Each experiment provided insight into the man who had once shattered his family, and Daniel catalogued every detail meticulously. Meanwhile, David remained blissfully unaware, confident that the past had been buried. His arrogance made him careless. He continued to flaunt his success, charm others, and indulge Claire, believing that no one could threaten his carefully constructed world. Yet subtle cracks began to appear. Colleagues whispered about inconsistencies, neighbors noticed tension behind his polished smile, and Claire herself grew increasingly frustrated with his unpredictability. These small fissures, unnoticed by David, were precisely what Daniel had been waiting for. To strengthen his position, Daniel began gathering evidence, photographs, testimonies, and records that would later make his confrontation undeniable. He also built alliances with those who could support his cause, discreetly ensuring that he had the necessary leverage without alerting his father. Every move was carefully orchestrated to appear coincidental or innocuous, maintaining the element of surprise that would be critical for the final confrontation. Through it all, Daniel remained patient. He understood that revenge required not only intelligence but also timing and restraint. His moral compass guided his decisions, ensuring that his actions would bring justice without causing unnecessary collateral damage. As weeks turned into months, the tension grew palpable. David's paranoia began to mount, though he could not yet identify its source, while Daniel's careful observation and strategic planning moved ever closer to the moment when the son's calculated brilliance would confront the father's arrogance, and the long-hidden truth of betrayal would finally be exposed. The day of confrontation arrived with an almost cinematic inevitability. Daniel had carefully orchestrated every detail, ensuring that David would be isolated in a controlled environment without the possibility of escape. The venue, a high-end office space David often used for private meetings, was familiar to him, which made the trap even more effective. Everything appeared normal. Appointments, schedules, and the presence of colleagues created the illusion of routine. Yet behind the surface, Daniel's planning had turned the mundane into a stage for revelation. As David entered the room, exuding his usual confidence and charm, he did not notice the subtle tension in the air. Daniel greeted him calmly, without a hint of aggression, yet the measured tone carried an undeniable weight. He began by referencing minor inconsistencies in David's recent behavior, details only someone who had observed closely for years could know. David laughed nervously, brushing them off as trivial misunderstandings. But Daniel's eyes held a quiet intensity, and the atmosphere began to shift. Piece by piece, Daniel revealed the truth. Evidence of the elevator incident, photographs, witness testimonies, and documented lies were presented with unflinching clarity. Each revelation struck like a carefully aimed blow, stripping away the layers of arrogance and control that David had relied upon for so long. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of the confession, David's composure cracking as the undeniable reality of his actions came to light. Claire, who had been secretly observing from a distance, watched in disbelief. The charm and control she had once admired in David now seemed hollow, vulnerable, and utterly exposed. Her influence over him crumbled, replaced by shock and fear as she realized the magnitude of the confrontation unfolding before her. Daniel's delivery was precise, balancing rage, sorrow, and moral authority. He recounted the years of emotional torment, the betrayal of trust, and the pain inflicted upon both his mother and himself. Every word was measured, ensuring that the truth resonated with maximum impact. David's attempts at denial faltered, giving way to panic and disbelief, as the carefully constructed image of his life began to crumble. The confrontation ended not with violence, but with revelation and accountability. David was left to confront the full weight of his actions, the betrayal, the lies, and the long-lasting consequences. Daniel's intelligence, patience, and moral clarity had ensured that justice was served in the most devastating yet controlled way possible, leaving everyone present shocked, awed, and irrevocably changed by the truth that had finally come to light. The aftermath of the confrontation was nothing short of catastrophic for David. Once a man who seemed untouchable, he now faced the combined weight of public humiliation, legal scrutiny, and personal devastation. The evidence Daniel had gathered, meticulously documented and undeniably convincing, ensured that David could no longer hide behind charm or influence. Charges related to the elevator incident, manipulation, and endangerment of his pregnant wife were brought forward, and the court of public opinion was merciless. Colleagues, friends, and neighbors who had once admired him now whispered in shock and disbelief, watching the man they thought they knew crumble under the weight of his actions. Claire, too, faced the consequences of her involvement. The illusion of power she had wielded over David dissolved, leaving her exposed and abandoned. Her ambitions, previously supported by David's wealth and influence, evaporated as those around her distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The carefully constructed facade of the illicit relationship disintegrated in public view, a stark reminder of the price of manipulation and deceit. Meanwhile, Daniel and Emma began the delicate process of rebuilding their lives. The trauma they had endured left emotional scars, but the sense of vindication provided a powerful counterbalance. Together, mother and son navigated the complexities of public attention, legal proceedings, and personal healing, drawing strength from their shared resilience. The bond between them, already strong, deepened further as they faced the aftermath of years of betrayal and planning. The community, initially stunned by the revelations, began to recognize the courage and intelligence displayed by Daniel. His meticulous planning, moral clarity, and unwavering patience in the face of a father's arrogance became a story of admiration and awe. People were shocked not only by the exposure of David's actions but also by the brilliance with which justice had been executed. Emma, finally free from the constant fear and manipulation, allowed herself to dream of a future unburdened by deceit. She and Daniel had not only survived the treachery of the past but had turned it into a triumph of moral courage and strategic brilliance. The life they rebuilt was no longer perfect in the naive sense, but it was honest, resilient, and infused with the hard-earned satisfaction of justice served. In the months and years following the revelation, life for Emma and Daniel took on a new rhythm, one defined by healing, growth, and cautious optimism. Emma, once burdened by fear and betrayal, found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served. She began to focus on her personal aspirations, exploring hobbies and projects she had long set aside, and slowly reclaimed a sense of autonomy that had been stolen from her. Each small victory, whether completing a painting, reconnecting with old friends, or simply enjoying a quiet evening without fear, reinforced her resilience and reminded her that the past, though painful, no longer held dominion over her life. Daniel, now fully aware of the magnitude of his father's betrayal and the intricate planning that had led to his exposure, grew into a man of remarkable maturity. His intelligence, patience, and moral compass, honed over years of observation and preparation, guided him as he navigated his own path. While the desire for revenge had motivated him, it was justice, rather than malice, that had shaped his actions. This distinction became central to his understanding of adulthood and responsibility, teaching him that the pursuit of right and wrong must be tempered with wisdom and restraint. David, on the other hand, faced a reality he had never anticipated. Isolated, humiliated, and stripped of the power he once wielded effortlessly, he was left to confront the long-term consequences of his choices. The community that had admired him now recoiled, and Claire's influence evaporated, leaving him without allies or excuses. The once proud man could only reflect on the destruction his arrogance and lust had wrought, a sobering testament to the cost of betrayal. Even as life moved forward, the shadow of past events lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the strength required to overcome deception. Emma and Daniel's bond, strengthened through adversity, became the foundation for a life built on honesty, vigilance, and mutual respect. While the scars remained, they no longer defined them. Instead, they stood as symbols of endurance and triumph. Ultimately, the story that had begun with betrayal and danger concluded with resilience and moral victory. Emma and Daniel's journey underscored the profound truth that even in the darkest moments, courage, intelligence, and unwavering integrity could restore justice and transform lives. Theirs was a life no longer perfect, but real, earned, and unforgettable, an enduring testament to the power of truth and the relentless pursuit of justice.